Good evening from New York. While Vice President Aaron Burr shot a man, not unlike Dick Cheney did, but on some vast eternal scale of governmental malfeasance, Mr. Burr was always ahead of Mr. Cheney by dint of having post-vice presidency, tried to undermine the next presidential administration by, in his case, allegedly trying to set up his own country in the South and the West. Our fifth story in the countdown, now Cheney is even challenging Burr on that front. Tonight, news that while still vice president, Mr. Cheney undermined then-President-elect Obama to the Israelis. And there's been a non-denial denial of Sy Hersh's report earlier this month that there were Cheney-controlled death squads intent on killing people in the whispered name of the United States of America. So much for the complete cooperation with the new administration that President Bush had promised the night of the election. Seymour Hersh writing in the new issue of the New Yorker magazine that when Cheney learned the president-elect had been putting pressure on Israel to stop its bombing campaign in Gaza and to withdraw its ground troops, the then vice president lashed out, bad-mouthing the new guy. Diplomacy at its finest. Quoting Hersh, Cheney, who worked closely with the Israeli leadership in the lead-up to the Gaza war, portrayed Obama to the Israelis as a pro-Palestinian who would not support their efforts, and in private disparaged Obama, referring to him at one point as someone who would never make it in the major leagues. In an interview with Andrea Mitchell on this network, Mr. Hersh revealing today that Obama's policies and desires ultimately prevailed over Cheney's, Obama helping to end Israel's Gaza offensive.
What happened is that Obama did communicate to Israel his strong desire that they stop the Gaza offensive. If you remember, the Israelis began bombing of Gaza in late December, and the bombing continued until right before the inauguration when it stopped. And I don't think there's any question that Obama's desire had something to do with it.
With the stopping?
Absolutely.
Meanwhile, a former aide to the vice president possibly confirming the worst while desperately trying to deny it. He suggested that Hersh's previous revelation that Mr. Cheney presided over a kind of executive assassination ring was, quote, certainly true. You will recall that earlier this month, Mr. Hersh claimed to have uncovered at least the outlines of a covert executive assassination ring that reported directly to Vice President Cheney's office. This afternoon on CNN, former Cheney National Security aide John Hanna flat out denying Hersh's account, calling it not true, before admitting that the salient detail of the story was certainly true.
There's clearly a group of people that go through a very extremely well-vetted process, interagency process, that have committed acts of war against the United States, who are at war with the United States, or are suspected of planning operations of war against the United States, who authority is given to our troops in the field in certain war theaters to capture or kill those individuals. That is certainly true.
Or it isn't. Time now to call in our own political analyst, Richard Wolff. Good evening, Richard.
Good evening, Keith.
The overview here, a vice president publicly and privately bad-mouthing the president-elect within weeks of his ascendancy to the presidency. Is this unprecedented?
Well, there are certainly vice presidents who've done worse things, like cook up intelligence to invade the wrong country or seek to authorize torture, for instance. But, you know, it's worth raising the direct comparison with a situation that another vice president found himself in not so long ago, when, after a contested election, he stood up in front of national TV and quoted Stephen Douglas talking to Abraham Lincoln saying, "The time for partisan feeling must yield to patriotism." And that vice president was Al Gore. And he was talking about Bush and Cheney and the recent decision from the Supreme Court handing them victory in the 2000 election. If Vice President Cheney had any recollection of those searing events, then he really should take them to heart, because this is a moment when, in a transition, it is important to think about patriotic things like the smooth transfer of power. Clearly, he was trying to undermine that if Sy Hersh as reporting was true, and we've seen in the past that it has been true.
And what does that do to those who thought beforehand that Dick Cheney was only interested in helping himself, the 500 people closest to him, and a few like-minded people around the world?
Well, the conspiracies are always true, right? Especially when it comes to this vice president. You know, Cheney has unfortunately confirmed the worst feelings at pretty much every turn. And look, it's just a remarkable situation that you would have a sitting vice president trying actively to undermine the incoming president with a foreign power. I mean, you know, there was an old saying that politics stopped at the water's edge, but clearly this takes it to another level.
Hirsch's current piece in The New Yorker is actually about Obama's foreign policy success in the region. The Cheney anecdote is actually a side thing that's sort of buried inside. Hirsch wrote that the renewed Israeli-Syrian negotiations over the Golan Heights, are now highly likely that would offer Obama his first and perhaps best chance for the engagement in the Middle East peace process. So Obama succeeds in getting Israel to stop bombing Gaza, and now he's on the edge, perhaps, of Israeli-Syrian negotiations. And he'll never be a major leaguer. How exactly?
Well, fortunately, it's not up to outgoing vice presidents or presidents, for that matter, to decide who gets into the major leagues. And, of course, this was Cheney who also said that Obama was somehow pro-Palestinian. Obama, in the middle of the campaign, said that he believed in an undivided Jerusalem. You know, if that's pro-Palestinian, then the Palestinians are really screwed. There is no rational behavior that can explain what Cheney did in office or how he looks at this situation. He has clearly convinced himself through some degree of paranoia that only he could save the country against some infernal terrorists, and everyone else was trying to weaken the country and massacre entire American cities. That's the only way you can really interpret these feelings that he has. And
to that point of that last clip of Mr. Hanna on the other network today, a Cheney aide who admitted that authority is given to our troops in the field in certain war theaters to capture or kill certain individuals. How exactly is that a denial of what Cy Hirsch hinted at earlier this month?
Well, it's a piece of legalese and an obfuscation, and it's only ironic that, again, casting back to 2000, for an administration that came in and campaigned against that kind of legal jargon, that they should be trying to revive that kind of argument now. I suspect that someone, if not Cy Hirsch and someone in Congress, will get to the bottom of this, and there will be legal proceedings.
They had better. MSNBC political analyst Richard Wolff. As always, Richard, great thanks.
Thank you, Keith.